Good morning to all. Am I audible? Please someone respond. Am I audible or not? Okay, fine. Thank you. So, as part of our syllabus, in yesterday's class, we have been discussed some topics related to human rights and other things. So, today we will continue from yesterday's class regarding human rights concept. Then we will go for next topics as mentioned in our syllabus. So, so as we discussed in yesterday's class, there are several types of human rights are there. So the most important sources of human rights are majorly there are multiple treaties are there on human rights which are binding on states who are party to such treaties. For example, the European Union Convention on Human Rights, the American Convention, the African Charter on Human Rights, and People's Rights. So so, if you see the basic human beings are described as rational beings. So, thus given certain basic rights since birth. So, these rights are inherent in all human beings as they become operative at the birth of a person. So, these rights given to physical, moral, spiritual, and social welfare of a person. So they are also known as fundamental rights, basic rights, inherent rights, natural rights, and birth rights. So here, one of the achievements of contemporary international relations or international law is that it recognizes human dignity and honor. So this also been reflected through various deliberations and conventions adopted by the United Nations on Human Rights. So as we discussed in 1948 UN Declaration on Human Rights, so the conventions have tried to protect the rights of individuals at national level by incorporating provisions into the constitutions of the countries. So many non-governmental, regional, national, and international level organizations work to bring cases of violation of human rights to light and try to prevent such occurrences. So if you see the major characteristics of these human rights are universal, as we discussed in yesterday's class, which means that they are given to every individual, irrespective of his caste, creed, race, religion, nationality, and place of birth, etc. So these are inalienable rights. So many philosophers believe that there are natural rights given by God and cannot be taken away or changed by anyone. So there are indivisible also. So and interdependent rights also. If a government gives one right, then it has to protect the other rights of a citizens. So, for example, it is the duty of government to protect the right of fair hearing and provide food, shelter, and clean environment to its citizens in order to protect the right to life of its citizens. So they are inherent to each person and available since birth. So that's what we called it as human rights. So they are not lost of a man is not similar with his rights, or if he does not use his rights. For example, if a person is not aware of his right to consult the advocate, then it does not mean that his right is finished. So it is then the duty of authorities to provide him with free legal aid and tell him his rights. So they protect the dignity and personality of humans. Rights like right to life and right to liberty and right against arbitrary arrest and punishment, etc., protect the dignity of a person. So, if we see the classification of human rights are inherent and interdependent on each other, and so there are not many different kinds of human rights. All these rights are equally important and inherent in all human beings, as we said, irrespective of their age, their sex, their caste, their creed, their race, and religion, and their location or nationality. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights did not precisely categorize human rights but mentioned two kinds. One is civil and political rights, and another one is economic, cultural, and social rights. So, if we see the theoretical classification of these human rights, the civil and political rights are that protect the life and personal liberty of a person are called civil rights. So they are necessary to so they are necessary to maintain the dignity of a person. So these rights include the right to life, right to liberty and security of a person, the right to privacy, the right to own property, freedom of thought, freedom of expression, the right to religion, and right to movement. So these are belongs to civil rights. If we see the political rights are such rights that allow a person to participate in government activities. So these includes like right to vote and right to be elected, means right to contest in elections. So the nature of such rights are different, but they are interrelated to each other, right? So but these rights are covered in the international covenant on civil and political rights. So these rights are also called as first generation rights and derived from 17th and 18th century theories related to the America, English, and French revolutions. So, already American Revolution in 1776, French Revolution in 1789. So these form a part of negative rights because the government abstains from doing such activities or forming policies that violate these rights. So, if we see the civil and political rights are recognized in UN Declaration of Human Rights by United Nations, one is right to life, right to personal liberty, and right to security. And another one is freedom of liberty, and third one is prohibition against torture and inhuman treatment, and next one is equality before law and equal protection, remedy before national tribunals, freedom from arrest, which is arbitrary in nature, and right to privacy, right to nationality, right to own property, right to freedom of religion and conscience, freedom of expression of thought, and freedom to conduct a peaceful assembly or meeting and take part in governmental activities. These are all belongs to civil and political rights. So if you see the basic fundamental rights are there, some human rights are guaranteed to the citizens of the state through constitutional provisions and cannot be infringed to any cost. So even by the state authorities also. So these are termed as fundamental rights. So the expression of fundamental rights is stated in declaration and constitutional provisions of many states in the world. So at first time, the Virginia Declaration of 1776, and it states that men are free and independent and have certain inherent rights. And the French Declaration of Human Rights are rights of man and citizen, which is placed on 1789, provides that men are born free and have equal rights. So even our Indian Constitution guarantees six fundamental rights to the citizens of country. So as we mentioned in part 3 of Constitution of India, we have placed initially seven fundamental rights. Later in 1978, from with the effect of 44th Constitutional Amendment Act, we removed right to property from the list of fundamental rights and placed it as a legal right under Article 300 subclass A. So at present, there are only six fundamental rights are there in our constitution. The first one is right to equality from Article 14 to 18, and the second one is right to freedom from Article 19 to 22, and the third one is right to religion from Article 25 to 28, and fourth one is cultural and educational rights. This right is from Article 29 and 30, and right against exploitation from 23 and 24, and right to constitutional remedies from Article 32. So Article 32 is the heart of and soul of these above fundamental rights. So from Article 32, there are several types of writs are there, five writs, namely habeas corpus, mandamus, prohibition, certiorari, quo warranto. So if anyone or any organization or any government or a person violates the fundamental rights, so the courts can issue these writs to protect these fundamental rights of a person. So these are the fundamental rights guaranteed by our Constitution of India. So another one is natural rights. So the history of human rights is rooted in ancient times. So and many philosophical concepts of natural law and thus also termed as natural rights. So Plato was one of the first writers to give a standard ethical code of conduct. So Aristotle also mentioned that rights change as per the different kinds of circumstances faced by society from time to time. So since human rights are universally applicable to every person in the world, and also it is similar to human rights. So natural rights have been derived from natural law, which opines that law must reflect moral reasoning and must be related with morals. So, on the other hand, positivism states that human rights are a result of enactments of statutes and orders by law, which comes with various sanctions attached to it. So, these all are natural rights. So another one is moral rights. Moral rights means human rights are determined by the spiritual and moral conduct of a person are termed as moral rights. So they are primarily contained in moral rights as they highlighted various moral values that cannot highlighted by any set of institutional rights. So these moral rights promotes moral values like respect for everyone, brotherhood, secularism, protection of life, peace in society, etc. So these human rights also put moral obligations on the state and the people not to violate and not to infringe on the rights of other people. So if done so, it will be punished as per the provisions of these set of statute or constitution. So another one is legal rights. Legal rights means the rights that are recognized by the legal system of a country are called legal rights. So the two essential elements of these rights are, one is the holder of the right and another one is a person bound by duty. So rights and duties are correlated to each other a person cannot have a right without any corresponding duty. So the government of any state should pass any such laws which infringe on the rights of the people. And another one is economic rights, cultural rights, and social rights. These rights are also called freedoms and guarantee a person the minimum necessities of life. So these are also included in the International Covenant on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights. So these rights include right to work, social security, physical and mental health, and education, and also the various economic, cultural, and social rights recognized by the UN Declaration on these economic rights and cultural rights and social rights. Majorly, there are like right to social security, right to work, and right to choice of employment, right to rest, and right to standard living, and right to health, and right to education, and freedom to participate in cultural life, and right to social and international order. So, and also in addition to these rights, there are yet another kind of rights called collective rights. So these rights are enjoyed by individuals collectively and include the right to self-determination, physical protection of the group, and the prohibition of genocide. So if you see the future of these human rights, um, uh, with the advancement of technology, climate change, developments in science, can we say these rights are enough to protect the life of and liberty of individuals. So these rights, though provided through legislative provisions, along with an obligation on the state not to infringe upon such rights, are times violated by various actions and steps of the authorities. So some of the human rights are not directly guaranteed in the constitution of a state as a fundamental, but indirectly under the ambit of a particular right. So human rights are laid down on the basis of fundamental rights which are guaranteed to the citizens of every country. So as we discussed in yesterday's class, every state is establishing at national level and their state level with a constitutional or statutory bodies. If you see in India, National Human Rights Commission at the national level and State Human Rights Commission at the state level work to protect human rights and take on any dispute related to its infringement. However, with the advancement of the technology and science, there is a need to revise and refine these rights in order to meet the changes. So these are the conclusion about human rights. So as we said, human rights in India is guaranteed by the Constitution of India. So these are the concept of human rights. Our next topic is about uh, what it is. Weapons of mass destruction. Uh, Weapons of mass destruction. So in this topic, we will know about the types of weapons of mass destruction and impact of these weapons in at the world level or global level. So if you see, a weapon of mass destruction is a nuclear, radiological, chemical, biological, or any other weapon that can cause widespread destruction or kill large number of people indiscriminately. So there is no agreement or international law that provides proper definition of weapons of mass destruction. So the use of weapons of mass destruction dates back to the 14th century in Europe, when biological weapons are invented and used by the Central Asian war leaders. So if we see the the concept of these weapons of mass destruction, so uh, weapons of mass destruction constitute a class of weaponry with the potential to produce in a single moment an enormously destructive effect capable to kill millions of civilians, jeopardizing the natural environment and fundamentally altering the lives of future generations through their catastrophic effects. So, cause these weapons of mass destruction cause uh, death or serious injury to people, so toxic or poisonous chemicals, and also disseminate uh, disease causing organisms or toxins to harm or kill humans, animals, or plants, and also deliver nuclear explosive devices, chemical or biological or toxin agents to use them for hostile purposes or in armed conflict. Several multilateral treaties exist to outlaw several classes of weapons of mass destructions, like one is biological weapons convention and another one is chemical weapons convention. So these multilateral treaties targeting the proliferation, testing, and achieving progress on the disarmament of nuclear weapons, including Treaty of Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the treaty banning nuclear weapon tests in the atmosphere, in outer space, and underwater, and also known as Partial Test Ban Treaty (PTBT), and Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, which was signed in 1996 but has yet to enter into force. So, several treaties also exist to prevent the proliferation of missiles and related technologies, which can be used as a vehicle to deliver weapons of mass destruction. So, another multilateral grouping, the Nuclear Supplier Group, was formed to avert the proliferation of nuclear weapons and prevent acts of nuclear terrorism. So, this NSG, Nuclear Suppliers Group, is a group of nuclear supplier countries that seek to prevent nuclear proliferation by controlling the exporting of materials, equipment, and technology that can be used to manufacture nuclear weapons. So, if you see the types of mass destruction, as uh, mentioned in this definition, these weapons of mass destructions are: one is biological, and another one is chemical, and the third one is nuclear weapons. So if you see the biological weapons, a bioweapon or biological agent of threat is the usage of bacteria, virus, protozoa, or parasite, fungus, chemical, or toxin purposefully as a weapon in bioterrorism or biological warfare. So, more than 1,200 different kinds of potentially weaponizable bioagents have been described and studied to date. So, if we see the controversy about coronavirus also belong to this type of bioweapon. So, whether it is true or false, so some critics also there. It's also biowar. So so uh, and there are several international laws on biological weapons are there. International restrictions on biological weapons began only with the 1925 Geneva Protocol, which prohibits the use but not the possession or development of chemical and biological weapons. So in 1972, Biological Weapons Convention is an international treaty banning the development and the use and stockpiling of biological weapons. As of March 2021, there were 183 states parties in this biological weapons convention. So in 1985, the Australia group was established a multilateral export control regime of 43 countries aiming to prevent the proliferation of chemical and biological weapons. In 2004, the United Nations Security Council passed resolution um, which obligates all United Nations member states to develop and enforce appropriate legal and regulatory measures against the proliferation of biological, chemical, radiological, and nuclear weapons and their means of delivery, in particular, to prevent the spread of weapons of mass destruction to non-state actors. These are belongs to bioweapons and disarmament on these bioweapons. So another one is chemical weapons. A chemical weapon uses chemicals to inflict death or injury on living and non-living beings. So according to the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, this can be any chemical compound intended as a weapon or its uh, what we call precursor that can cause death or injury or temporary incapacitation or sensory irritation through its chemical action. So, chemical weapons also can be widely dispersed in gas, liquid, and solid forms, and many easily afflict others than the intended targets. So, nerve gas, tear gas, and pepper spray are three modern examples of chemical weapons. So, we have been seen in during the Second World War, the Nazi regime belonged to Germany used a commercial chemical agent to commit industrialized genocide against Jews and other targeted populations in large gas chambers. So the Holocaust resulted to the largest death toll on chemical weapons in the history. So there are several international laws are there on chemical weapons. In initial days, international law prohibited the use of chemical weapons under the 1899 Hague Convention. Later, in 1922, Washington Naval Treaty, also known as the Five Power Treaty, aimed to banning chemical warfare but did not succeed because France rejected it. So in 1925, Geneva Protocol, officially known as the Protocol for the Prohibition of the Use of War of Asphyxiating, Poisonous or other gases and of bacteriological methods of warfare, is an international treaty prohibiting the use of chemical and biological weapons. In 1993, Chemical Weapons Convention is the most recent arms control agreement with the force of international law. Its full name is the Convention on the Prohibition of the Development, Production, Stockpiling, and Use of Chemical Weapons and their Destruction. So, this agreement outlaws the production, stockpiling, and the use of chemical weapons. And also, it is administered by the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, which is an independent organization based in the Hague. So, and third one is nuclear weapons. A nuclear weapon is an explosive device that derives its destructive force from nuclear reactions. So, either fission or a combination of fission and fusion reactions. So, both bomb types are release large quantities of energy from relatively small amounts of matter. So, nuclear weapons have been deployed twice in war by the United States against the Japanese cities Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945 during the World War II. Presently, 8 countries, China, France, India, North Korea, Pakistan, Russia, the United States, and the Britain or United Kingdom have acknowledged being a nuclear state. But other countries like Israel maintain nuclear ambiguity also. So there are several international laws are there on nuclear weapons. So it is very dangerous to the present society. And in the 1960s, steps were taken to limit both the proliferation of nuclear weapons to other countries and the environmental effects of nuclear testing. So first one is the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty in 1963 restricted all nuclear testing to underground nuclear testing to prevent contamination from nuclear fallout. So later in 1968, the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons also attempted to place restrictions on the types of activities signatories could participate in to allow the transference of non-military nuclear technology to member countries without fear and proliferation. So in 1996, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty was introduced, which prohibits all testing of nuclear weapons. So, in this treaty, India has not signed because of nuclear non-proliferation treaty, but it's a signatory to both Biological Weapons Convention and Chemical Weapons Convention. So, a testing ban imposes a significant hindrance to nuclear arms development by any complying authority. So the presence of weapons of mass destruction in the world is a terrifying reality, and efforts have to be put in the by the international community together with support from the nuclear weapon states for guaranteeing a safer and peaceful world. So biological weapons are the greatest concern of mankind in the contemporary world. Among the uh, many components of weapons of mass destruction, hence requiring a stringent verification of mechanism. So for chemical weapons, the stipulated goal enshrined in the this convention. So unfortunately, it had not been able to keep the time limit, and the movement towards achieving the target has not picked up by the control of these weapons. So the current debate on nuclear weapon-free world has to take a proper shape, and the commitment has to come from top nuclear weapon countries like the United States and Russia. So the threat is real, and unless and until adequate measures are taken on time, the possibility of getting hold of fissile materials in the wrong hands can never be ruled out, encouraging acts of bioterrorism. So these are about weapons of mass destructions. If we see the weapons of mass destruction in India's stance, so the in recently the parliament has passed the weapons of mass destruction and their delivery systems amendment bill 2022. So so it was signed and ratified the biological weapons conventions and the chemical weapons convention. India is also subscribing state to the Hague Code of Conduct, and India is a member of 3 multilateral export control regimes. One is the Missile Technology Control Regime and Vazana Arrangement and Australia Group. And also, India has not signed the CTBT Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty nor the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, considering both to be flawed and discriminatory. So, India previously possessed chemical weapons but voluntarily destroyed its entire stockpile in 2009, one of 7 countries to meet this extended deadline. So, India maintains a no first use nuclear policy and has developed a nuclear triad capability as a part of minimum credible deterrence doctrine. So, India has developed weapons of mass destruction in the form of nuclear and chemical weapons. So, India has ratified Chemical Weapons Convention in 1996 and declared stockpile of 1,044 tons of sulfur mustard in 1997. So, India has not released any official statements about the size of nuclear arsenal. Recent estimates suggest that India has 160 nuclear weapons and has produced enough weapons grade plutonium for up to 200 nuclear weapons. So, India has conducted nuclear weapon tests in 1974 and 1998 in Pokhran, Rajasthan. So, India has ratified the Biological Weapons Convention, and India has a well developed biotechnology infrastructure, including biocontainment laboratories for working with lethal pathogens. So, however, there is no evidence of India possessing biological weapons or having an offensive biological warfare program. So, former President Dr. Kalam, during his tenure, he had said that India will not make biological weapons. It is cruel to human beings. So this is the stand of India on these weapons of mass destruction. So we have one more topic is about India's foreign policy. So in this topic, we will discuss about basic determinants of India's foreign policy and aims and objectives of India's foreign policy and the main features of India's foreign policy. So every nation has its own foreign policy. At the same time, India occupies a very important positions in the world or international political system. It is the largest democracy and the seventh largest country in area, and the second at not second at present first most populous country in the world with many languages, many regional diversities. So it's a land of uh, lofty mountains and mighty rivers. Uh, so if you see, the every nation has its own foreign policy. So and also we have the concept of international terrorism also there. Before the where it is syllabus. So, so we will discuss international terrorism. Then we will discuss after this about Indian foreign policy. So if you see the concept of terrorism, terrorism is a term that frequently appears in the news. So it's a broad term that refers to a wide range of events and ideas. So terrorism has a profound impact on the world, and India in particular has been a victim of various terrorist actions done by various parties. So the word terrorism comes from the French word terrorism, which is derived from the Latin word terror, which means I terrify. So, uh, so if you see the main causes of terrorism, one is political insurgency and guerrilla warfare, a form of organized political violence perpetrated by a non-state army or group where the origins of terrorism theory. They pick terrorism because they dislike society's current structure and wish to change it. And also, it is in general the polar opposite of independence, growth, and human rights. terrorism has had the greatest impact on India's frontier regions, particularly those bordering with Pakistan. So, uh, so, uh, so if you see this terrorism is the act and the intimidating people by using organized and systematic violence done by an individual or a group to achieve their political and religious and cultural objectives called as terrorism. So if you see the terrorism measures are uh, types of terrorism in India, particularly, there are three various types of terrorism is there. One is ethnic terrorism, second one is religious, third one is ideological. If we see the ethnic terrorism, terrorism based on any identity crisis, resource crisis, or cultural imperialism among various ethnic groups is called ethnic terrorism. It is spread in the northeast region of India. And religious terrorism, it is also a systematic violence propagated based on religious is called as religious terrorism. So the feeling of religious superiority is at the root of this terrorism. So religious terrorism in modern time is considered terrorism, and ideological terrorism also uh, if the purpose of planned violence is motivated by communist elements, it is called left terrorism or Naxalism. But if the origin of violence is inspired by religious and cultural elements, then it is called right wing terrorism. So, if we see the dominance of religious terrorism in India, from India's point of view, there are several levels of terrorism in the light of religion. One is global terrorism, cross border terrorism, and domestic terrorism. So, the global terrorism has a global impact. So, they mainly target Western countries, particularly America and Europe. The first and frightening glimpse of global terrorism was seen during 9 by 11 attacks in America. In recent times, the nature of global terrorism has been seen in France and Austria. So, if you see the India stand on this terrorism, India opposes all forms of terrorism due to the policy of non-violence and acceptance of democracy. So that is why when Osama bin Laden was killed in Pakistan in 2011 in action against terror by the United States, India called the move worthwhile. So India has tried several times in the United Nations to ban global terrorism. So, due to which the United Nations has also banned Masood Azhar. Along with this, India is also making terrorism an issue in bilateral negotiation. So, in recent talks between India and Central Asia, agreements have been made against terrorism. So, cross-border terrorism also important. In this mode of terrorism, persons who are not citizens of India but who are sponsored by any religious purpose or neighboring countries carry out terrorist incidents in the country. So, along with this, they also support separatist movements going on in India. So, if you see the Union Territory of Ladakh, Jammu and Kashmir is the most affected by these activities. So, there was clear evidence of Pakistan sponsored terrorism in incidents like Pulwama, Mumbai, to 26 by 11 and Pathankot attacks. So, if you see the India stand on this cross-border terrorism, India makes a multi-layered effort to combat cross-border terrorism. So, the army, the law and order in India have made arrangements to diagnose them. The airstrike after the Pulwama attack and the earlier surgical strike made it clear that India could also use military operations against terrorism but would not tolerate terrorism. So, in the same sequence, India also suspended bilateral relations with Pakistan due to the zero tolerance policy on terrorism. So, if you see the domestic terrorism, this relative deprivation, identity crisis, and increasing extremist feeling of majority community and the presence of communal elements in society takes the form of domestic terrorism. So the society and the nation of India are still going through the process of maturity. So communalism becomes an obstacle in this nation building process. If you see the India's stand on this domestic terrorism, somewhere in the roots of domestic terrorism, socio-cultural deprivation remains. So the rights given to the minorities by the constitution have been kept in the fundamental rights, which are protected by the Supreme Court. So laws like UAPA, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, have been enacted by the Parliament of India to deal with terrorist activities, communalism, etc. So India's security forces are constantly engaged in creating an environment of security in the country. So terrorism is not just a violent activity, but attacks the social, cultural, and defense fabric of the country and the society, and hinders of sustainable development of the country. So terrorism in any form is fatal to society and the nation, but the absence of world consensus on terrorism based on wrong religious concepts, it is the biggest deterrent in the path against terror. So therefore all the countries must solve problems like the socio-economic unrest, refugee crisis, human rights abuses globally, and stands unanimously against all forms of terrorism to end it. So, there are several steps needed to curb terrorism. So a comprehensive and multi-dimensional strategy for the war on terror must involve an integrated view of the strategic military and economic domains, among others. So uh, many global cooperation on extremist content and global sanctions against nations that are state sponsors of terrorism, uh, and also addressing UN high level conference on heads of counter terrorism. India extended a 5 point formula. So if you see that 5 point formula, one is exchange of timely and actionable intelligence, and prevention of misuse of modern communication through collaboration with the private sector, and building capacities for improved border controls, and sharing of information related to the movement of passengers, designation of counter terror focal points to fight global terror. In addition, these should be a concerted effort from the countries affected the uh, scourge of terrorism to pressurize countries who engage in state sponsored terrorism. So it is necessary for countries fighting terrorism to learn more closely from their differences rather than they try to generalize from experience. So the success or failure of each of these approaches must be studied and applied to smaller countries suffering from global terrorism based on applicability. So United Nations must become the global center to fight global terrorism. So the complete implementation of United Nations Global Counter-Terrorism Coordination Compact that was agreed upon in 2008. So intelligence sharing between countries needs to be strengthened, and countries currently not affected by global terrorism needs to take the threat seriously. So if we conclude this concept, terrorism is a complex and non-static phenomenon. So its associated motivations, financing, and support mechanisms, methods of attack, and choice of targets are often evolving, thereby compounding the challenges of the ensuring the existence of an effective strategy to counter it. So in this situation, global cooperation is of paramount importance. So India should play a proactive role to neutralize any threat of terrorism. So there is a need for the world to join hands and take concrete multilateral initiatives to ensure that terror groups are dealt with a heavy hand. So, accepting and ratifying the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism proposed by India would be good first step. So, India has been consistently working towards fighting the menace of terrorism at both global and national front, thus adopting certain measures at policy level. So, uh, no international convention exists that determines intelligence and evidence sharing, extradition of accused of persons hiding outside national territory. So, and recently, India has also voted in favor of Resolution 34 by 8 of the Human Rights Council on effects of terrorism on the enjoyment of human life. So, uh, so this is the concept of terrorism. If you see the types of terrorism, one is ethno-nationalist terrorism, and second one is religious terrorism, and the third one is ideological oriented terrorism. So in recently cyber terrorism is there, bioterrorism is there. So if you see the majority of ethno-nationalist terrorism, these terrorism inspired by ethno-nationalist and separatist goals rose to prominence only after World War II. So ethno-nationalist terrorist acts include like Tamil nationalist organizations in Sri Lanka and insurgent groups in Northeast India. If you see the religious terrorism, terrorist acts today are mostly driven by religious imperatives all around the world. So, and also ideological oriented terrorism means left wing and right wing terrorism. If you see the left wing terrorism, violence by the peasant class, mostly inspired by so called leftist beliefs, communists such as Lenin and Mao backed this notion in their writings and speeches. So, for example, Red Army faction or Badr means gang in former West Germany, the Maoist groups in India and Nepal are the most easily identifiable groups closer home. If you see the right wing terrorism's examples, Nazism in Germany, fascist in Italy. So, right wing organizations typically aim to retain the status quo. So, sometimes their ideas are ethnic or racist overtones as well. So if you see the cyber terrorism, it's when cyberspace or terrorism collide. So it refers to illegal attacks and threats of attacks on computers, networks, and the information stored on them. So if you see the bioterrorism involves deliberate release or spread of biological agents. So if you see, for example, bacteria, virus, insects, fungi, or toxins. So these are the different types of terrorism. If you see the impact of terrorism, it's a huge challenge to international peace and security, as well as threat to humanity's essential principles of peace and growth. So so and also, terrorist attacks frequently transcend national boundaries, and terrorist attacks with chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, or explosives materials have devastating implications for people and infrastructure. So, and also, terrorist activities destabilize governments and impede economic and social progress. So, every nation in the world also facing the same uh, terrorism issue. So if you see, India also one of the major victim of this terrorist system. So many attacks have been happened in India, and later many steps taken by the India to combat terrorism. So, and recently, following many terrorist attacks on Mumbai on November 26, 2001, the government established the National Investigation Agency for particularly for this to combat terrorism. So many intelligence agencies, including Research and Analysis Wing, Intelligence Bureau, and others that are tasked with combating terrorism both inside and outside the country. So the NSG, National Security Guard, is a paramilitary group charged with counter-terrorism and anti-hijacking activities. So we India advocates for a zero tolerance policy against terrorism and is working to build a single approach to combat it. So this is about the concept of terrorism. In tomorrow's class, we will discuss about Indian foreign policy and India's relations with major superpowers and neighbors. Okay, thank you for your participation. I am concluding the session. Tomorrow we will meet again at same time, 10:30 a.m.